It has been 1 year since the release of Spider-Man 2 by Insomniac. In fact, it's been over a year, because I'm late. Spider-Man 2 was one of my most anticipated games of all time. One of my most played and replayed games of all time, in fact. I've accumulated well over 360 hours onto the game. And most of those hours were even before New Game Plus was out. I love this game. And with developers that I didn't even realize made some of my favorite games even before their Spider-Man games, like Ratchet & Clank or Sunset Overdrive, it makes so much sense that I love this game and this series itself. And I felt that it was only appropriate that a year in, I should talk about my praises and critiques, and a couple other things at the end. So let's start strong with some traversal critiques. I don't like the swing arch limit. I don't like how I'm forced to let go of my web from a normal swing at all. It limits your ability to move in cool, fun ways. You're less able to make more precise upward swings. It doesn't allow you to do as much as you could do had it not existed. And something that's been really showing itself to me, there's also very few ways to gain speed mid-swing without using your traversal boosts. And while I like these moves, they can be pretty limiting, where all you're really able to do is go forward or diagonal up. And that's nice. But the primary issue with this is the fact that I want to swing in stronger ways. And I think the easiest way to add a more dynamic way to speed up while mid-swing without using your specific abilities is just to have a charge jump. The same way many other Spider-Man games have had, like Web of Shadows, Spider-Man 2 and 3. And I think especially with how much there is in Spider-Man 2, I think it'd be a very clean addition. And some things that I love that Insomniac had done with traversal is how much they actually increased the speed cap. It makes moving around the city very highly expressive, incredibly dynamic, and poses just feel so good. It makes you feel just like you're playing a really good game. And their inclusion of web wings in a way that wasn't invasive or overriding of swinging is very impressive. Considering adding a new traversal mechanic tends to go poorly in many cases. And the way the web wings work are just very nice. You can either keep your altitude and slowly lose speed over time, or you can sacrifice a lot of altitude in order to gain a pretty sizable amount of speed by just kind of diving downwards with your wings out. And something really lesser talked about among the community, to me, has to be their addition of a charge jump to instantly activate when you use the charge jump shortcut. And it makes it really nice to move around. It's a lot easier to gain height from doing a, I guess, just point zip? I don't know what it's called. Instead of a point launch. It gives you a lot more mobility, even if it does have a bit less speed. It gives you a higher jump. It gives you a more, I guess, just customizable way to move around the map. And that's very nice. And the way it very cleanly integrates with combat is super nice. Just instantly being able to do a super jump and instantly start webbing enemies up, or like get away from someone like the brutes, the symbiote brutes. Oh, it's wonderful. And moving on to those combat praises, I think many people don't recognize the combat improvements made by Insomniac. Multiple different ways to utilize the web yank, left, right, and slam. Left and right serving as a great way to capitalize on whatever environment you're fighting in. If you're fighting with buildings and walls around you, you can smack them against it. If you're fighting on a roof, you could pull them off the building for a quick win. And my favorite thing to do with the web yank is smack and trip over enemies with either the web or even whatever enemy you are attached to. and Slam operating as a great way to deal damage while staying in your same position or to briefly trap them in the air, combined with new gadgets that serve as a way to either disable enemies or set up follow-up attacks, more similar to the gadgets in Spider-Man Miles Morales rather than the insta-kills in Spider-Man 1, and 10 special moves for Peter, and 9 special moves for Miles counting Venom Blast, with each of these moves serving as a way to either deal heavy damage to an enemy or just instantly take them down, with only a few moves usable in different ways, like using Peter's Venom Punch on a raised enemy to then chase them further into the air, Venom Yank, and Miles' Reverse Flux to jump off area enemies. I think the combat is just a pure upgrade to what Spider-Man 1 and Miles Morales actually had. Because while they are still fun games, they are very rinse and repeat. The combat system is very much just beat up the enemies and throw your gadgets. And I think adding as much as they did, even if it is very simple additions, and I think the biggest gameplay issues have to be the fact that there's so little variety in what you do in the game. I mean, stealth has been reduced to being completely optional for all but one story mission, which is a flashback to 15-year-old Peter in high school. There's no time trials for web swinging, which is a huge letdown considering the speed increase. That would be wonderful. Wonderful inclusion. And then the fact that Peter has no combat trials, considering the Mysteriums are all Miles exclusive, even if you're in New Game Plus, and the least amount of overworld crimes in all 3 of the Insomniac Spider-Man games, which another creator has already made great suggestions on what to add in the future. And even if I do like the story in the game, I've only got a few praises. There are great dynamics, like Peter, after losing his aunt, starts to wonder if killing his villains is the right thing to do. Meanwhile, Miles ends up abandoning his lust for revenge and redeeming the man who killed his father. Harry foreshadowing the symbiote's manipulation by commenting when he was in stasis he heard his mother's voice talking to him, which is later revealed to have been Venom when he shows off that Venom is able to use other people's voices to communicate to its host. Harry and Kraven's mirroring situations where they want to do great things, but they come down with conditions that will cut their lives short. Harry with Ashtorn syndrome and Kraven with cancer. But I have far more story critiques than praises. Like Miles getting written out of the story for nearly the entire first half of the game, giving the excuse that he has an essay to write, which barely goes anywhere. And nearly every time I expected an arc about Miles going on his own and jumping into fights trying to desperately find Lee, but instead his story missions end up only setting up side missions, while Peter does most of the first half until Miles gets kidnapped. And then, Peter's darker tendencies in the symbiote suit aren't really too focused on. Peter does too little actual bad things in the story for the black suit to actually seem as bad as everyone insists it is. And while the suit does make him worse, all Peter does is set a guy down roughly and get pissed at MJ and Harry. But that shouldn't make someone like Danica catch on to things who wouldn't know about that. And even if there were witnesses to the overworld crimes that you do with Black Suit Peter, those would only be about 3 days worth of fighting crime with the black suit. The day that he gets it, the day after, and the day he loses it. And most of the damage shown to us is caused by the villains. The Hunters and the Lizard tearing up the pier, the Lizard breaking through the museum and crashing through buildings in Harlem is the most destruction that happens when Peter's in the black suit. And yet, despite Peter having the suit for only 7 out of the 31 main missions, and only having it for 3 days, he's given all the blame for the destruction the Hunters and the Lizard cause. And despite Venom having a near perfect introduction, Harry livid at Peter for wanting to destroy the symbiote, not having experienced any of the negative side effects, interpreting all of Peter's actions with the suit as exclusively Peter because of that, and reuniting with the symbiote, officially becoming Venom, instantly taking down Peter after Peter has already taken on a horde of hunters, Kraven himself, and of course Miles, Venom rips through Oscorp, a large-scale representation of Harry's stasis inside the vat that he started the story in, and ending the mission, killing Kraven, another man whose body has betrayed him, finalizing that Venom doesn't have to fear death as long as he has Venom. But then instead of a vengeful Venom trying to take revenge on who he thinks wronged him, Venom wants to cure the world exclusively. He wants to heal the world, practically abandoning any anger towards Peter, and instead just wants to make everyone mindless symbiotes. And in the final mission, the game makes it clear that Harry and Venom aren't symbiotic, and Harry is being controlled by Venom. There are more critiques I could go into, but those were just the ones that I could remember. And the fact that it is that much more than my praises should definitely say enough. I do think the performances in Spider-Man 2 are phenomenal. I think Yuri Lowenthal poured his soul into his recordings, and it shows. And our other Spider-Man, Najee Jeter, did a wonderful job as well as Miles. All the performances in the game are really good, with of course Tony Todd's Venom being a very clear standout. The game is wondrous in terms of its quality everywhere else but the story. Presentation's phenomenal. The set pieces are great. The performances are fantastic. The graphics are great. The game's optimization is astonishing. I know many people have had bugs in the game, especially on launch, but personally, I ran into nothing but like one door prompt not appearing that I fixed in 5 seconds. I love Insomniac Spider-Man 2. I think it is absolutely my favorite Spider-Man game. And while I know it can be better, we'd have to start looking at Sony as to why it's not better. Brian Intar himself has stated nearly 10 months ago that Sony had Insomniac push out Spider-Man 2 as fast as they could. There was no mission replay on launch, something that Spider-Man Miles Morales had. There was no time of day change, something that both the previous games had. There was no post-game Black Symbiote for 6 months. It was a pretty lackluster post-game. That's not even talking about how there was no New Game Plus for 6 months either. And there was the least amount of challenge areas of the 3 games. There was less bases to challenge on repeat. There were less trials to repeat. And there was less overall side missions than the previous 2. And even if I hadn't experienced many of the bugs and issues at the start of the game, at the launch of the game, I know many other people did, and that is something to mention. And of course, the third act of the game, having little build-up to Symbiotize Manhattan, is a pretty significant one. And especially how few times you actually see Venom, and Venom involves himself in the main story, well, actually interacts with the spiders, is pretty telling. Especially the fact that he only ever really talked to Miles one time on a phone call that doesn't really hold too much weight, and is the only reference Miles gives to Harry in their final talk. And while you could interact with Harry while he's all Agent Venomed up, that can only happen in between one mission. And it's right before you have to, rescue MJ and Connors from New Jersey. Sony very clearly rushed the game. I don't think there's any denying that. And it is a miracle that the game came out as good as it did. But who knows what would have happened considering what Sony let happen to Insomniac. Because Insomniac was hacked near the release of Spider-Man 2. And the hackers gave Sony an ultimatum of either pay us $2 million or we leak the data. And Sony did not pay them. Which means, had the game even gotten delayed, it's very likely the game that we actually experienced would have been leaked probably about a year before the game even gets released. If the game did actually get the delay that it needed. Pre-alpha footage, alpha footage, and beta footage was leaked, which for some reason some people started to mock the unfinished footage for looking unfinished. An entire PC build of the game was leaked. Don't look for it. It does exist, but don't look for it. Their pre- and post-launch roadmap was leaked, which made many people believe DLC was on the way, despite neither Insomniac or Sony had ever directly hinted or teased, not counting the Chameleon or Carnage, considering those could be interpreted as things that'll appear in Spider-Man 3 and not DLC. And not just their Spider-Man 2 roadmaps were leaked, but their next 8 years of production were leaked. 5 unannounced games announced through a leak, not only raising expectations for many, but also endangering the projects from even happening. And of course, the personal information about Insomniac developers and employees, putting them all in personal risk. Insomniac did not have a good year, despite the fact that it should have been a really good year for them. I do believe the game should have been delayed, but it is nothing but a question what would have happened to the game had it actually been delayed, and then this super leak happens anyway. Because could you imagine that? The leak happening before the game's even released? Like, I didn't mention it earlier, but there's also a version of the Wolverine game in its beta stage out there right now. It is insane just how much was leaked. And with a game that far in development, imagine Spider-Man 2 getting leaked. The game would have been ruined before it even released. And I can't help but feel so sorry for the developers at Insomniac. And yes, god damn it, Sony. You did it again? Come on. The second Venom's involved, the property's already doomed. I blame Venom.